Honestly, Brenda, I don't know how you can live in a place this small. My daughter-in-law wrinkled her nose as she stood in the doorway of my little brick house. I'd lose my mind if this was all I had. My son Ryan chuckled under his breath. Neither of them noticed I was still holding the tray of fresh cinnamon rolls I'd baked for their visit. I set the tray on the kitchen table without spilling a crumb. That's the nice thing about owning a home, I said evenly. You only have to impress yourself. Brenda laughed louder. Oh, come on, Margaret. You're 70. You could at least move somewhere modern. Ryan and I would never settle for this. She waved a perfectly manicured hand around my kitchen. The cabinets were oak. The floors had been refinished 3 years earlier. The walls displayed family photographs spanning 4 decades. Everything was spotless. It wasn't luxury. It was home. I smiled. Fortunately, I replied, pouring coffee into 3 mugs, we don't all have to make the same choices. The smile disappeared from Brenda's face for a fraction of a second. She wasn't expecting agreement. She was hoping for embarrassment. Instead, she received neither. Ryan glanced at his watch. We've got to leave soon anyway. Of course. Brenda took one bite of the cinnamon roll, set it back on the plate, and whispered just loudly enough for me to hear. I don't know how people get comfortable living so modestly. I pretended not to hear, because I had heard something much more interesting 6 days earlier. My name is Margaret Ellis. I'm 70 years old, 5'4", with silver hair. I cut myself every 6 weeks because I've never believed in paying someone to do something I can learn. I retired from commercial property management after 38 years. Numbers calm me. Paperwork comforts me. Quiet has always suited me better than applause. My late husband, Daniel, repaired elevators for 31 years before a heart attack took him 12 years ago. We weren't flashy people. We simply saved. Every bonus. Every tax refund. Every overtime check. Daniel used to say, own assets, not appearances. I listened. Apparently Brenda never had. She was 34, beautiful, impeccably dressed, endlessly ambitious, and deeply concerned with how other people viewed her. She worked in luxury real estate marketing, where image wasn't just important, it was the product she sold. Her greatest strength was confidence. Her greatest weakness was believing confidence could replace facts. Ryan, my only son, was 36. Gentle, hardworking, conflict avoidant. He managed software projects for a healthcare company and spent most of his life trying to keep everyone happy. That quality made him kind. It also made him dangerously easy to influence. They had been married for 5 years and rented a gorgeous penthouse apartment downtown. Every holiday dinner included subtle comparisons. My kitchen island is twice this size. Our building has valet parking. The rooftop pool is incredible. I never competed. People secure in their lives rarely do. After they left, I washed the coffee cups, wiped the counters, and walked into my small home office. A single metal filing cabinet stood beside the desk. Second drawer. Blue folder. Harborview Residences. I unlocked the drawer. Inside sat property tax records, insurance renewals, mortgage satisfaction documents, commercial lease agreements, annual maintenance budgets, and one familiar address. The exact building where Ryan and Brenda rented their luxury penthouse. Harborview Residences. 12 stories. 84 units. Purchased by Daniel and me 17 years earlier through our family holding company. The tenants never dealt with me directly. Professional management handled everything. I preferred it that way. Most residents had no idea who owned the building. Brenda certainly didn't. Neither did Ryan. I closed the folder. Not because I was hiding anything. Because ownership had never been something I used to impress people. The following Tuesday, my property manager, Carlos Medina, called. Carlos was 58, meticulous, practical, and impossible to rattle. He'd managed Harborview for 9 years and treated million-dollar problems with the same calm tone he used for changing hallway light bulbs. Morning, Margaret. Morning, Carlos. I wanted to update you before Thursday. What happens Thursday? The annual lease renewal meeting. I remembered. Ryan and Brenda's lease expired in 6 weeks. They renewing? Carlos hesitated. That's actually why I'm calling. I leaned back. Go on. They requested a discount. How much? 20%. I blinked once. Reason. They said comparable buildings are offering incentives. Are they? I checked. And they aren't. Interesting. Carlos continued. They also requested free parking and waived storage fees. I reached for a legal pad. Current monthly rent? $4,850. Parking? $175. Storage? $95. I wrote each number carefully. No emotion. Just facts. Anything else? He cleared his throat. Brenda mentioned. And I'm quoting. The owners should appreciate having tenants like us because we improve the image of the building. I stopped writing. Did she? Word for word. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I opened another folder. Lease history. 5 years. Always paid. Usually on time. 1 late payment. No complaints. No lisbahuelaschens. Good tenants. Confident tenants. Perhaps a little too confident. Wednesday morning became what Daniel used to call a ledger day. I reviewed every operating account connected to Harbor View. Reserve fund balance. Maintenance escrow. Property tax account. Capital improvement budget. Occupancy reports. Then I reviewed lease policies. Discount approvals required ownership authorization. Parking exceptions required ownership authorization. Storage waivers required ownership authorization. Every request eventually reached my desk. Not Carlos's. Mine. I made 3 neat notes. No rent reduction. No parking waiver. No storage waiver. Then one more. Meet tenants personally before final decision. Not because they were family. Because I suddenly wanted to see whether Brenda spoke to every landlord the way she spoke to me. Late Thursday afternoon, Carlos called again. They're here. In the leasing office? Yes. Give me 10 minutes. I picked up the blue folder, locked my front door, and drove toward Harbor View. As the elevator climbed toward the management floor, I could already hear Brenda's voice through the partially open office door. If the owner has any business sense, she was saying with a laugh, they'll realize people like us are exactly what keeps this building prestigious. Carlos glanced up as I stepped inside. His expression changed instantly. He stood. So did Ryan. Brenda didn't. She simply smiled at me and said, Margaret, what are you doing here? I smiled back. That, I said quietly, setting the blue folder on Carlos's desk, depends on whether you're ready to meet the owner. Brenda looked at me, then at Carlos, then back at me again. She laughed. You're joking. Carlos didn't. Ryan's eyes moved slowly toward the blue folder sitting on the desk. Something about the way Carlos had immediately stood when I entered had caught his attention. Mom, Ryan said carefully. What does she mean? I rested one hand on the folder. I'll answer that. The leasing office suddenly felt much smaller than it had 30 seconds earlier. Carlos quietly closed the conference room door. No one spoke. Finally, Brenda folded her arms. So, what exactly is going on? I looked at Carlos. Would you excuse us for a few minutes? Of course. He stepped outside, leaving the 3 of us alone. I turned toward my son first. Ryan, do you remember the apartment building your father and I bought after the recession? He frowned. The one with the old elevators? Yes. I thought you sold it years ago. We refinanced it. I never sold it. His forehead wrinkled. This is Harbor View. He blinked twice. Our building. Yes. Brenda let out a short laugh. No. I met her eyes. Yes. She looked toward Ryan. She's kidding. Ryan wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the framed ownership certificate hanging behind Carlos's desk. Harbor View Residential Holdings LLC. Managing partner. Margaret Ellis. His face slowly lost its color. You own this building? I do. For how long? 17 years. Brenda's confidence cracked. Just a little. You never told us. You never asked. Nobody said anything for nearly 20 seconds. Then Brenda recovered. Well. She forced a smile. That's wonderful. It is. I'm actually glad we know now. So am I. She pulled out a chair and sat. This makes everything much easier. Interesting. Not congratulations. Not Dad would be proud. Not even I had no idea. Straight to business. She leaned forward. So you'll approve our renewal? I opened the blue folder. Inside were 3 neatly organized documents. Current lease. Renewal request. Discount application. I've reviewed it. And I won't be approving the discount. Her smile disappeared. What? The lease renews at market rate. You own the building. Ido. So giving us a discount costs you nothing. I smiled politely. It costs the building revenue. We're family. I know. Ryan finally spoke. Mom. Yes. Can't you make an exception? I can. And I'm choosing not to. Brenda leaned back. I don't understand. I know. I slid the lease renewal across the table. $4,850 monthly rent. $175 parking. $95 storage. Exactly as written. Brenda laughed in disbelief. You're serious? Yes. We're your family. So are the other 83 households. She frowned. That's different. No. It absolutely is. I folded my hands. If I lower your rent because you're my son, what do I say when another tenant asks for the same treatment? They're not your children. They're still my responsibility. Ryan rubbed his forehead. I never knew. I wasn't hiding it. You let us think. I let you live your lives. Brenda interrupted. You've been collecting our rent? No. The management company has. But the money eventually reaches the ownership account. Her face tightened. So every month? Yes. You've been our landlord. Yes. She looked genuinely offended. You should have told us. I tilted my head. Why? Because. She stopped. Because there wasn't actually a good answer. Carlos knocked gently. May I come back in? Please. He returned carrying another folder. The updated operating reports. Thank you. Brenda glanced toward him. You knew. Carlos nodded. Since I accepted the position. And you never said anything? My employment agreement doesn't allow me to discuss ownership. Professional. Exactly as expected. I opened the operating report. Occupancy. 98%. Maintenance reserve healthy. Insurance renewed. Roof replacement scheduled next spring. Everything exactly where it should be. Then I reached the final page. Pending tenant requests. 3 highlighted entries. Apartment 1204. Ryan and Brenda Carter. Requested. 20% rent reduction. Parking fee waived. Storage fee waived. I signed beside each recommendation. Denied. Brenda watched the pen move across the page. You didn't even think about it. I already had. For how long? Since Tuesday. You planned this. No. I reviewed policy. Same thing. No. Policy isn't personal. That's why it works. Brenda stood abruptly. I can't believe this. I can. We've always paid on time. You have. We're good tenants. You are. So why are you treating us like strangers? I'm treating you exactly like tenants. That's the problem. No. That's the solution. Ryan looked exhausted. Mom. What? Can we talk privately? Carlos immediately stood. I'll step outside. So will I, Brenda said sharply. She slammed the conference room door behind her. Ryan remained seated. For the first time all afternoon, he looked less like a husband, more like the little boy who used to sit beside me while Daniel balanced the family checkbook. I honestly didn't know. I believe you. You should have trusted me enough to tell me. I smiled sadly. Ryan, I've owned this building longer than you've been married. It was never a secret. It simply wasn't relevant. He nodded slowly. Then he asked the question I'd been expecting. Is this really about the lease? No. What is it about? I looked toward the closed conference room door. It's about respect. He looked down. You heard what she said about your house. Yes. I'm sorry. I know. No. He shook his head. I should have stopped her. I didn't answer. Because he was right. Silence often encourages disrespect. especially when it comes from people we love. Ryan stared at the renewal papers for several seconds, then quietly asked, "What happens if Brenda refuses to sign?" I closed the folder. "Then something much more important than a lease will have to be decided." Brenda came back into the conference room before Ryan could answer. She'd fixed her lipstick, straightened her blazer, smoothed every wrinkle from her expression. Only her eyes gave her away. They weren't angry anymore. They were calculating. She sat down slowly and folded her hands. "I think we all got off on the wrong foot." I nodded once. "Perhaps." She smiled. "I didn't realize you owned the building." "I know. If I'd known." She let the sentence hang. "Things would have been different." "I believe they would have." Ryan looked relieved. For a moment he thought the conversation had turned a corner. It hadn't. Not yet. Brenda leaned forward. "Let's start over." "All right. We're family." "Yes. We all want what's best for each other." "I agree. So here's what makes sense." She reached for the lease renewal. "You approved the rent reduction." I said nothing. "You waived the parking fee." Still nothing. "And maybe we extend the lease for 5 years." Ryan slowly turned toward her. "Brenda." She continued talking. "It gives you guaranteed tenants." I finally spoke. "It gives you discounted housing." She smiled. "Well, everyone wins." "No." Her smile faded again. "Only you do." She changed tactics. "I think you're taking my comments about your house personally." "I am." "I was joking." "Were you?" "Of course. You've made similar jokes for 5 years." She blinked. "I didn't mean anything by them." "I believe you." That confused her. "You do." "Yes. You simply revealed what you genuinely value." Ryan looked at the table. Brenda looked irritated. "What does that even mean?" "It means." I folded my hands. "You judge people by appearances." "No, I don't." "You judged my home within 30 seconds." She opened her mouth, closed it again. There wasn't much to argue with. The words belonged to her, not me. Carlos quietly entered with fresh coffee. Nobody touched it. He placed another envelope beside me. "Sorry to interrupt." "No problem." He left again. Brenda glanced at the envelope. "What's that?" "The annual tenant satisfaction survey." She laughed nervously. "You're not actually running a business meeting right now." "I am." She looked toward Ryan. "Do something." He rubbed both hands across his face. "What do you want me to do?" "Talk to your mother." "I am." He turned toward me. "Mom." "Yes." "I think she's embarrassed." "I think so too." Brenda interrupted. "I don't need anyone speaking for me." Ryan looked exhausted. "Then tell Mom you're sorry." Silence. 5 seconds. 10. Finally. "I'm sorry if you misunderstood me." Ryan closed his eyes. Even Carlos, standing outside through the glass office wall, sighed. It wasn't an apology. It was a negotiation disguised as one. I stood. "I think we're finished." We walked into the leasing office lobby together. 2 maintenance supervisors waited near the reception desk. An elderly tenant was paying her rent. A young couple sat filling out an application. Life continued. Business continued. Exactly as it should. Brenda suddenly raised her voice. "So you're really choosing money over your own family?" The lobby became quiet. The elderly tenant looked up. The maintenance supervisor stopped talking. Ryan whispered, "Brenda." She ignored him. "I hope everyone here knows how she treats her own son." No one answered. And said, Mrs. Helen Brooks, the 82-year-old tenant standing at the counter, slowly turned around. Helen had lived in Harborview for 13 years. She smiled at me, then looked at Brenda. "I've known Mrs. Ellis a long time." Brenda folded her arms. "Good for you." Helen continued. "When my husband died, she froze my rent for 6 months. Brenda frowned. "What?" "I couldn't afford both funeral expenses and housing." Helen smiled softly. "She never told anyone." Another voice spoke. One of the maintenance supervisors. "When my wife had cancer, Mrs. Ellis advanced my salary 3 months. I paid every penny back. She never asked for publicity." The young couple at the application table looked at me with surprise. Brenda's face slowly reddened. Ryan stared at his shoes. I hadn't recognized either opportunity as special. To me, they'd simply been the right thing to do. Helen looked back at Brenda. This building isn't prestigious because of expensive tenants. It's prestigious because it's honestly managed. Nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. Truth rarely needs applause. Brenda looked around the lobby. The audience she'd hoped would shame me had quietly done the opposite. She grabbed Ryan's arm. "We're leaving." He didn't move. "Ryan." Still nothing. Finally he spoke. "I'll meet you at home." She stared at him. "You've got to be kidding." "No. You'd rather stay here?" "I'd rather finish the conversation." She looked at me one last time. "This isn't over." Then she walked out. Her heels echoed across the marble lobby until the front doors closed behind her. Ryan and I sat on a bench outside the building for nearly half an hour. Traffic rolled past. People walked their dogs. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. Normal life. I married someone very different from the woman I met. He spoke so quietly I almost missed it. When did that happen? I don't know. Maybe slowly. He swallowed hard. Maybe I just ignored it. I rested a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to decide everything today. I know. But I do have to decide something. His phone vibrated. Brenda. He looked at the screen. Didn't answer. A text arrived. Then another. Then another. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. I think. He stopped. What? I finally understand why Dad always said character matters more than comfort. I smiled. He was usually right. Ryan looked toward Harborview, then back toward the road where Brenda had disappeared. I need to figure out which kind of life I actually want. Before I could answer, Carlos hurried out of the building holding a thick envelope. Margaret. I stood. What is it? He handed it to me. It was delivered by courier this morning. The sender's name made me pause. Bennett and Cole Attorneys at Law. Addressed to me. I opened the envelope. Inside was a formal legal notice. Not from a tenant. Not from the city. It had been filed on behalf of Brenda Carter. And as I read the first paragraph, I realized she wasn't fighting over discounted rent anymore. She was trying to claim ownership of the building itself. I unfolded the legal notice twice before speaking. Ryan watched my face carefully. Mom. I kept reading. Then I folded the document again and handed it to him. Read the first page. He did. Halfway through, his eyebrows pulled together. By the bottom of the page, he looked genuinely confused. This doesn't even make sense. No. It doesn't. The letter came from Bennett and Cole, a respected law firm downtown. Professional letterhead. Professional language. Professional formatting. Unfortunately, an unprofessional claim. Brenda alleged that because she and Ryan had lived in Harborview for 5 years, made improvements to their apartment, and had reasonably believed the property would eventually become part of Ryan's inheritance, ownership decisions should be paused until her interests could be reviewed. Ryan looked up. She hired lawyers? It appears so. Without telling me. I imagine. He rubbed both hands over his face. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. He looked at me. You aren't worried? I smiled faintly. No. Why not? Because feelings can create lawsuits. They can't create ownership. The following morning I met Martin Ellis in my office. He adjusted his glasses after reading the notice. I've seen stranger claims. You have. Once a tenant argued he owned an apartment because he'd watered the hallway plants. I laughed despite myself. Martin continued. This isn't a serious ownership claim. So why file it? Pressure. He placed the notice on my desk. People sometimes mistake legal paperwork for legal strength. It often isn't. What do you recommend? He opened his notebook. We respond. Anything else? Yes. He looked directly at me. Document everything. Fortunately, documentation had always been my favorite language. Another ledger day began. Not emotional. Methodical. Linda joined me with 4 archive boxes. Everything from Harborview? Everything. For the next 6 hours we built a timeline. Purchase agreement. 17 years earlier. Recorded deed. County registration. Property tax payments. Insurance renewals. Mortgage payoff. Capital improvements. Roof replacement. Elevator modernization. Fire safety inspections. Tenant assistance programs. Every invoice. Every signature. Every bank transfer. Every annual audit. Nothing dramatic. Just evidence. Martin smiled as the stack grew. If this ever reaches a courtroom. It won't. You sound certain. I know the difference between a legal dispute and disappointment wearing a lawyer. Meanwhile, Carlos called. I should probably warn you. About Brenda. What happened? She visited the leasing office. Without Ryan. Yes. And Carlos sighed. She introduced herself as the future owner of Harborview. I closed my eyes for 1 second. How did the staff respond? They asked whether she'd like to submit that in writing. I couldn't help smiling. Good. She became angry. I assumed. She demanded master keys. No. She asked for tenant files. No. She wanted maintenance schedules. No. Carlos nodded. We refused everything. Thank you. Before hanging up, he added one more sentence. I think this is becoming less about property and more about pride. He was right. 3 days later, the mediation request arrived. Not court. Not yet. A voluntary settlement conference. Brenda wanted to resolve family property expectations. Martin looked amused. There are no family property expectations. I know. So why attend? I closed the folder. Because sometimes people reveal more when they believe they're negotiating. The conference room at Bennett & Cole overlooked the river. Long walnut table. Neutral artwork. Fresh coffee. Very expensive silence. Brenda arrived first. Elegant cream suit. Designer handbag. Perfect posture. She looked confident. Until Ryan walked in separately. She frowned. I thought we were coming together. I drove myself. Her smile tightened. Then she noticed Martin. And this is my attorney. She blinked. I thought this was family mediation. Martin answered pleasantly. It is. Families often bring attorneys. The mediator, Susan Keller, introduced herself and explained the rules. Everyone would speak. No interruptions. Professional tone. Brenda nodded enthusiastically. She'd clearly rehearsed. Susan turned toward her. What outcome are you seeking? Brenda smiled. I simply want fairness. Susan wrote the word down. Please explain. Brenda folded her hands. Ryan is Margaret's only child. Correct. Everything will eventually belong to him. I remained silent. She continued. So Harborview is essentially a family asset. Susan nodded. Continue. We've lived there. We've invested emotionally. We've improved the apartment. I believe we deserve security. Susan looked toward me. Mrs. Ellis? I answered in one sentence. Security and ownership are different things. Brenda leaned forward. But eventually. I raised one finger politely. You said you wanted fairness. Yes. I'd like to ask one question. Susan smiled. Go ahead. I looked directly at Brenda. If Harborview lost money for the next 10 years, would you personally pay the property taxes? Silence. What? The insurance? No answer. The roof repairs? Nothing. The lawsuits? She looked uncomfortable. I mean, the payroll? Still nothing. I continued calmly. You've asked for ownership. I'm asking whether you're also asking for responsibility. The room became very quiet. Ryan slowly looked at his wife. Then something unexpected happened. Susan, the mediator, closed her notebook. I think, she said gently, we've identified the real issue. Brenda frowned. What issue? Susan answered without hesitation. You don't actually want to own a building. You want the benefits of ownership. Without accepting the obligations. For the first time since this began, Brenda had no response. Ryan stood. I'd like to say something. Everyone turned toward him. He took a slow breath. Then looked first at me. and then at his wife. I've made my decision. Neither of us knew which way he was about to turn. And for the first time in years, Brenda looked genuinely afraid. Ryan didn't look at me first. He looked at Brenda, the woman he'd loved for 5 years. The woman he'd defended more times than I would ever know. The woman now sitting across a polished conference table asking for ownership of a building she'd never invested $1 in. His voice was quiet. I've listened to every word today. Brenda nodded quickly. Good. And I realized something. She smiled with relief. You finally understand. No. I finally understand my mother. The smile disappeared. Ryan turned toward Susan, the mediator. I'd like the record to reflect something. Susan nodded. Go ahead. I had absolutely no knowledge of this legal claim before 3 days ago. Brenda stared at him. Ryan, I never authorized anyone to pursue ownership of Harbor View. Wait. I never asked my mother for discounted rent. Brenda interrupted. That's not fair. He kept talking. I also never believed I was entitled to something simply because I share her last name. The room fell silent. Susan wrote each sentence carefully. Brenda reached for Ryan's hand. He gently moved it away. For the first time. Not angrily. Just decisively. Ryan. Her voice cracked. We talked about this. No. You talked. I listened. She blinked. What is that supposed to mean? He leaned back in his chair. I've spent years convincing myself your comments were harmless. Silence. The jokes about Mom's house. The jokes about old furniture. The jokes about her clothes. The jokes about how successful people should live. He looked directly at Brenda. They weren't jokes. They were judgments. Brenda laughed nervously. Oh, come on. I'm serious. You've always been too sensitive. No. I've been too quiet. I had never heard my son speak that way before. Not louder. Stronger. There is a difference. Susan looked toward Brenda. Would you like to respond? Yes. She sat straighter. I simply wanted our future protected. Martin asked politely. Protected from what? Brenda hesitated. I don't know. Martin waited. She finally answered. I just didn't want everything to disappear. I spoke calmly. Everything. The inheritance. There it is. Nobody interrupted. I continued. You've spoken about fairness. You've spoken about family. You've spoken about security. But every road keeps leading back to one thing. The assets. Brenda looked down. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Susan closed the mediation file. I don't believe further mediation will be productive. Martin nodded. I agree. The legal meeting ended less than 15 minutes later. No settlement. No agreement. No drama. Just clarity. Sometimes clarity is the most uncomfortable outcome of all. 2 weeks passed. Bennett and Cole formally withdrew Brenda's ownership claim. Apparently, after reviewing 17 years of deeds, tax records, corporate filings, and trust documents, even her attorneys recognized there was nothing to pursue. The case ended before it ever truly began. I never celebrated. There was nothing to celebrate. Families aren't supposed to become legal files. Ryan called one Sunday afternoon. Mom. Hello. Can I come by? Of course. He arrived alone. No expensive SUV. No designer gifts. Just a paper bag from the neighborhood bakery. I remembered these were your favorite. Blueberry muffins. Daniel's favorite too. We sat at my small kitchen table. The same table Brenda once called too modest. Ryan looked around quietly. You know. What? This house feels different now. I smiled. It hasn't changed. I have. He picked up his coffee. I spent years believing success looked expensive. I think Dad would have laughed at me. He probably would. Then he grew serious. Brenda moved out. I nodded slowly. I wondered. We're separating. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked out the kitchen window. I kept asking myself one question. Which one? If someone only values me when they think something belongs to me, do they really value me? I didn't answer. He already knew. 6 months later, Harbor View held its annual tenant appreciation picnic. Nothing extravagant. Barbecue. Children's games. Local musicians. Ice cream. Helen Brooks insisted I judge the pie contest again because, according to her, I was the only one stubborn enough to tell people the truth. Carlos laughed. The maintenance team laughed. Even I laughed. Ryan volunteered at the food station all afternoon. Nobody treated him like the owner's son. He preferred it that way. He carried folding chairs, collected trash, helped an elderly resident load groceries into her car. Not because anyone asked, because character is built through ordinary choices. Late that afternoon he walked over holding 2 lemonade cups. I got promoted. I heard. You did. Carlos told me. Ryan smiled. I earned this one. I know. That sentence meant more to him than any promotion ever could. Before sunset I walked through Harborview one last time. Children played in the courtyard. Flowers bloomed around the entrance. Maintenance workers finished planting new trees. The building looked exactly as Daniel and I had imagined all those years ago. Not impressive. Reliable. A place people could trust. I slipped my hand into my coat pocket and felt the old brass key Daniel had carried for years. I still kept it with me. Not because it opened any doors anymore. Because it reminded me what ownership really means. Ownership isn't about collecting rent. It's about accepting responsibility when the roof leaks, when the elevator breaks, when a tenant loses a spouse, or when a family forgets that love and entitlement are not the same thing. If this story stays with you, remember this. A person's true wealth isn't measured by the size of their house, but by the strength of their character. Respect is never something you inherit through marriage or family. It is earned through humility, gratitude, and integrity. And if someone only values you after discovering what you own, they were never valuing you in the first place. So tell me honestly, if you were Margaret, would you have renewed their lease under the same terms? Or would you have made a different decision?